Let's move on to our advisory council reports. First one up is Curriculum Advisory Council.
Mr. Sadie, I don't know if it's possible, but we have a teacher here. Could we?
Sure, we can do that.
I mean, if it's not
Jane.
appropriate to change the,
Come on, step up, James.
Come on, step up.
we want him alert for the students in the morning.
You got it.
This one,
If you don't have enough. How come you go to good places in this issue?
you received a handout tonight based on a few questions from Mr. Walsh.
Correct. I hit it in there.
I had also had contacted
Thanks. Thank you.
our attorney based on some of those questions. So the board received a copy of the attorney's email, as well as an example of a permission slip you would like to use in regards to this type of field trip.
Okay, so,
I think there's two topics here, Matt, that probably, obviously, James, we recognize the importance of the trip and will allow you an opportunity to talk about the trip and the relation to the educational setting. The second thing that the board needs to discuss, based on what Todd's email, and the policy committee is already working on this, and you'll see this in the advisory council report that we're working on, our current board policy, in regards to, Todd and I really came up with 3 different types of field trips. But for tonight's purposes, it gives you some background on the thing you received from Todd and on whether or not we need to. Obviously, there's no action taken on this tonight, so this is an opportunity for you to ask James some questions, and then we can go from there and discuss if we want to create a separate permission slip or a separate letter that he would need to distribute to all the parents that want to go on this trip, saying that the district is not sponsoring this trip, and nor is it taking any liability in relation to this trip. Okay? So I think we should first of all allow Jamie to speak in regards to the trip.
All right, thank you. When the C team was running, we ran a number of summer trip opportunities, and last year I took a group of students out to the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem through an organization called Ecology Project International. And first of all, we were just thoroughly impressed with the type of program that they ran, the people that they worked with, the partnering opportunities that we had. Students got to work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park System, Nature Conservancy, just to name a few. And what I really appreciated as a teacher is that we didn't just go on a sightseeing trip. We did a number of different ecology projects, a lot of hands-on stewardship types of opportunities, and I really felt as though it presented a broad range of experiences to our students. So I was very, very pleased with Ecology Project International in general, which, it stuck in the back of my mind. Obviously, without the C team running this year, I was contemplating whether or not to do this. I've had a number of former C team students, as our past practice was with the C team. We invited current C team members and former C team members to participate with the trips that we went on. And without having the C team this year, I am teaching the AP Environmental Science course. And so a lot of the topics and everything that we are discussing in class relate to the mission that Ecology Project International sets forth. And another one of their trips that they had was to Costa Rica, and that was in part information that I believe you guys have received previously, kind of outlining the trip. It is a 9-day trip. The cost of the trip was $27.95. That is all-inclusive, including airfare, lodging, meals, all of the materials and everything that we would need outside of personal belongings for the trip. The trip itself, here again, is focused ecologically, still relating to studies. Another thing that I really thought would be unique with this particular project is at the end of our project, one of the things, I guess also as a science teacher that I enjoy, is the students have to come up with a project while we were there. So they have to develop their own inquiry question, carry out their own inquiry while we're there, and report out on those findings throughout the course of the trip. But at the end of this, we actually would be working with similar school-age students in the areas that they are working. So I think not only the opportunity to have some firsthand ecological experiences, I think some of those cultural exchanges would be very valuable to the kids as well. There were some questions that I'd received from Mr. Walsh. I forwarded them on to the representative from Ecology Project International, and the email response that I received from her I photocopied to you. I did take a look at our field trip form, which is photocopied on the back side of that. I believe it's photocopied on the back side, I'm hoping. Okay. You know, I didn't see anything in that particular field trip form that mentioned anything about a release of liability in there. And maybe that's some of the information that Dr. Skinkus was referring to as far as, you know, possibly reviewing a additional field trip form. But in the, not only the email correspondence that I had, I spoke with Ms. Hanson last night on the phone. She had mentioned that basically they look at this as a contract between Ecology Project International and the families of the people who are participating. She said that it is possible that we could draft something that would include releasing liability of the school district, but before we pass that out, she would just ask that we would forward that on to them so that they would have an opportunity to review it and make sure that they would be okay with it if the trip is approved and we get to that point. There were some also questions as far as including us as insured. Basically, I believe in the first three questions that you had, to me it sounded as though they would be able to draw up agreements incorporating us with them. It sounds like they may have done that in the past with a couple of schools where it has been a concern. With regards to the chaperone issues, once we hit 9 students, or up to the 9 students, we have the 1 chaperone. Moving above that, we would be eligible then for a second chaperone to attend. They had both male and female field staff members from Ecology Project International. They all have to go through criminal background checks, et cetera, to be able to work with students. And having both male and female chaperones last year proved to be valuable because there are some things or some topics and issues that I think are more sensitive and worked well with having the female field staff. And then on top of that, she also had mentioned that not only with Ecology Project International, but there also are individuals from the organizations that we will be working with directly. So throughout the course of the trip, we're looking at probably at least 3 adult chaperones with the group, possibly 4, depending on if we reach that benchmark, to the higher numbers. Last year with the group that we had brought out, we had 6 members from RB. There were 6 other students from around the country that were also incorporated in the trip if we do not fill the full amount. It's something in the back of my mind, if we are approved for this, I would like to leave it open exclusively to RB students, similar to what we did last year for a period of time. And if we're not reaching those numbers, then to look at inviting other students from other schools. And there's some other AP environmental science teachers that I've been meeting with on a monthly basis who would be interested in inviting their students once we get to that mark or point if we need to. I don't know if you guys happen to have any questions in particular about the trip, or if there were questions maybe that I did not directly answer from Mr. Walsh's questions. I'm not sure.
Mr. Holt, are the chaperones expected to contribute anything toward their participation as chaperones on these trips, or are they entirely funded by the gross contribution of the students involved?
If we reach 9 students, that would pay for 1 chaperone. If we don't, for example, 2 years ago there was a Galapagos Island trip, and we only had 3. We had to reach a minimum of 6, and that chaperone I think ended up having to pay, I think it was around $1,200. I'm not 100% sure. basically Ecology Project International, they have a benchmark point. So, for example, if we only had 4 students, I would be responsible for fulfilling a certain dollar amount. I don't have that with me here, but I can get that information if you would like.
But in an ideal situation, they would be 100% funded for their participation as chaperones.
Correct, yes.
But there are some instances where they pay a partial amount because there's a partial person
Correct. Even if
participation by students.
Even if we only, let's say if we had 5 students from RB and the rest of the other students were coming from other schools, those numbers don't actually count towards ours. To pay for myself to be the chaperone of the 5 students from RB that are going, I would still be responsible for paying the remainder difference in there. So,
thank you. Interesting trips.
yeah, it's fantastic. And the time period that we had picked out, actually, we were told that they're anticipating the hatchlings of the leatherback sea turtles at that time, which would be pretty unique. So
Cool.
Well, one thing,
Thank you.
Mr. Hull, I just want to let you know, we're trying to get the process in place. We talked about some of these with the trip to Orlando for the band, so it wasn't to, I hope, pick on your.
Oh, no, and I
ask you the question. The other 3 things. One is, if we've got 10, say, do you have a second chaperone lined up?
I mean, I have 2 members directly here from RB
Okay,
that have
so
expressed interest.
Okay.
So, yes.
And then, and again, it doesn't matter after you've read it, but it sounds like they're trying to do immersion of Spanish. Do you give, I mean, if at $2,800, who knows how many kids will sign up? So
Yeah.
it's not a thing where you're going to be cutting kids out probably, or looking for somebody to speak Spanish, for instance, right?
No,
Okay.
no.
And what was the cost, just out of curiosity, what was the cost last year?
I think it was $1,800.
Okay, so, and you got how many to go last year?
We had 6.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And that was continental US, right?
Correct,
Was it
yes.
Yellowstone?
Yeah. And Galapagos was like 3,000 something.
I think it was 36 or 3,400.
All right, any other questions?
Are we going to discuss the process?
Yes, that's
Okay.
Yeah,
separate.
that's separate from.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go and teach our kids tomorrow. Make sure you do it. Okay, we're gonna bring this back, we'll start with the council, advisory councils, and then bring that back.
We
So,
can talk about that under policy.
all right, first advisory council up is the curriculum.
Hang on a second here. So Curriculum Advisory Council, we met on Friday, and that was the last council meeting of the month. And as Pam creates her operational calendar and we create a board operational calendar, we want to make sure some of these things are going to the board and getting approved by the board, or at least the board is seeing some of the things that are taking place at the building level. And this is some stuff I think that's been missing in the past, from previous conversations and requests from the board. So in order to make sure that we're keeping open communication with the board as well as transparency, we had a council meeting to discuss a few of these changes, plus some of the questions that a board member asked. We met with the council first, and now we're bringing them to the committee of the whole today. And then if there's anything that would need to be voted on, would happen in November. The course changes and course fees, I will let Pam speak to at this time.
Okay. You got a copy of what's being proposed. Very few changes, just increasing the band fee from $20 to $25 due to the increased costs over the last several years of dry cleaning in order to cover the marching band uniforms, the tuxedos, and the performance wear that the students are required to utilize while they're in those different bands. So that was the one. The other is, as you know from your own budget, I'm sure cost of food has gone up. And so running our foods and nutrition courses and hospitality, advanced foods, we're proposing a fee increase from $20 to $25. Still reasonable for that class. And then again, those fees are used to buy the food during that semester or school year that the students pay for it. So those were the 2 increases. And then the acting and directing, that course started with a $25 fee as we were getting materials, and they don't feel that there's really a need since supplies seem to be adequate at this point. So they looked at just eliminating that fee altogether. And those are the three from and the only request that came in from the leadership team. Does anybody have any questions about those?
Okay.
Okay.
And we had some course fees, or these are more or less, we're not changing or adding any courses, it's just some either title changes or curriculum changes, and I know there were a few questions from board members, so Pam, can you address those?
Certainly. Well, looking at the different questions, I'll just kind of go in order. The music appreciation course, there was originally on the books semester 1 class, or music appreciation 1, and then a music appreciation 2, which was a second option. No students ever signed up for the second level of the class. The second part, it never ran, even though it was on the books as an option for years. And in fact, this course hasn't run in the last 4 years. So it fell off. At one point, it was a fairly popular course, and several sections of the Music Appreciation 1 ran. But I think as times had changed and students had more access through technology to their own music and manipulating their own music, the interest in that course waned a little bit. And to be quite honest, the music program has just built in intensity and popularity over the years. And I think students who were going to take a music class and were interested were taking a performance-based class in vocal or instrumental. So this course is now been refashioned. It stays basically the same, as you can see, in looking at kind of the history of music and psychology of music and all of that. But it really goes more into allowing students to interact with music using the technology. And there's some free technology available to teachers now that allows a class like this to run without costing us any setup fees. So we already have the software and the hardware to run the course. It allows students, the opportunity to do a little bit more with production, and we think it's more relevant. It's just taking a class that existed that kind of became old school and not as interesting to students and refashioning it. A number of students are interested now in music production, even though they're not the singers or performers themselves. So we've just kind of updated the course with making it technologically relevant to kids. Does anybody have any questions about that? So
Thank you for the explanation.
no problem.
Do we have a limitation on the size of that class with computers?
Our labs, several of our labs have been expanded to fit larger class counts, so I don't anticipate a problem with that.
Should be able to reach our 30 to 1,
Yeah,
32 to 1.
should be no problem.
Thank you.
It doesn't require a lab every day, but we have a lab that can accommodate it. So the other fine arts class I'll talk about is the Advanced Placement Studio Art, which right now is just on the books as an AP Studio Art class. But actually a student can take an AP test in 3 separate areas of concentration. You spend a whole year in 2D dimensional design, 3D dimensional design, or drawing and painting. So they are 3 distinct courses, but and a student can, as it stands now, take AP Studio Art. Most of them take it twice, but it would be possible you could take it 3 separate times. But right now, it would look on your transcript like you repeated the same course, even though you're creating an entirely different portfolio and you're working in a different area. And at the end, you're taking a distinctive, separate AP test. So what we're trying to do now is name the course specific to the test the student would take, so that when a university is reviewing the transcript, it will really be a descriptor of what the student's taking. So it's somewhat similar to what we did last year when we renamed the CAD class pre-engineering or pre-architecture. It's more descriptive, it helps the student. So the reality is the students are going to be doing the same things that they've been doing, but their transcript would be more appropriate. Is there any question about that?
So
Yeah.
there are 3 different AP art tests,
Yes, there are.
and drawing and painting being a 2D medium, or media, What's the 2D one then? What does that do?
You know what, I think you would have to ask Mr. Gale that. I have not
yeah, I
seen
think
the
I'll sit
classes
with
or
him
taught
on
them. I'm really not sure all the distinct differences, but drawing and painting, I'm assuming is specific to that. 2D could be, end up with photography. It could be different, different media being used, was my assumption.
And so does he
Could be
teach
computer.
all 3
Art.
classes
Just
at the
curious.
same time?
No, usually the students, this year we were very lucky, we had enough students to be a standalone class, but no, they've been absorbed into other classes that exist. So in other words, in his regular drawing and painting class, he would have a few AP students. They're working very, at an advanced level.
But I mean, as a
independently.
general premise, that it's a shared class at some level, there's not a separate section for each of the
There wouldn't
3
be enough in
courses.
each of these to have a separate section, no.
Well, can I ask a question? It's
Yeah.
unrelated to this. Couldn't we do that with another subject, like AP Calculus A, B, and BC then, too?
The difference is the content is, it requires more teacher interaction because of the level of content. This is, in portfolio
Kinda self-
design,
you're
it's a
working
little
on your
bit
own a
different.
lot.
You have a concentration, a theme, something that you're trying to express, and you take the entire year to delve into it, and thematically, and kind of your philosophy of what you're trying to express. So it's quite a bit different, and then you're studying artists and, similar, you have some things that you're doing, but the BC is so teacher dependent that would be impossible to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, my next course to discuss would be the, well, there are a couple of others here, but the one, it'll be Algebra 2 Trigonometry Honors, changing that to, the name of that to Honors Pre-Calculus, not changing the course. So that sounds a little bit confusing, but it was explained a little bit in the rationale, and what you would consider Honors Algebra 2 Trig, but it has a number of the calculus topics involved in it, and it always has. But what they did is they named it, there was a discussion of which way to name it, and they named it Algebra 2 Trig, trying to distinguish it as the higher level of the regular Algebra 2 Trig. However, they add a number of calculus topics, and I have them all listed, and it's an extensive list. The challenge becomes, again, it's not as descriptive of what the students are doing. So Algebra 2 Trig is a precursor to AP Stats. It's getting students ready for that. It's getting them ready for, the next step. Pre-calculus, the students that take the honors level currently of Algebra 2 Trig, they're getting ready for AP Calc AB. I know it's all very confusing. So it's what they're preparing them for and what skills and strategies and knowledge they feel is necessary for them to get to the next level. It's all about scope and sequence. So where we're running into challenges in a couple of ways. First, it's not as descriptive, again, when students go to apply to a university. Most students would have an honors pre-calc before their AP Calc AB class. So our sequence has this honors class in it, but the name is less descriptive than what the students are really doing in the class because we've added so much calc in it. So that's one thing. The other is we have had a number of transfer students. Last year, for example, there were 30 of them, and a number of them came in already having taken Algebra 2 Trig, or coming to us, and what were they going to take next in their sequence. Their math was sequenced differently, and so they couldn't take it twice. And our honors level, you can't have them take one at a regular and one at an honors. So really what they needed next was this honors pre-calc class. So it helps those students as well. So it's something that the math department has kind of lived uncomfortably with for a number of years, and they decided finally let's name it what it really is, and it would benefit the students. But it's really not changing the course itself. So I don't know if that makes sense to people.
Well, you need to tell us what the exact difference between calculus and trigonometry is.
Oh, no. No. That's not in my job description.
Okay, any questions on that? All right, Pam?
Okay, then the next one is the sequence in, we went through this exact same situation at my former school. This is something that was brought to my attention at the end of when students had requested classes last year, and that is that our sequencing choirs has gotten a little bit awkward and not as productive as possible. What happened with Diane Morelli coming in and building a very popular, robust program that students stay in year after year after year, we didn't tend to have the right progression for kids that had been in the program to move to more difficult literature, but perhaps they weren't talented enough to make it into the top choir, the honors madrigal singers. So it was as if they were kept going through the same level again and again. So this is an opportunity to separate out a little bit. So that's why chamber and concert chorale are changed. And this is also something that is naming, nomenclature. It goes through kind of ebbs and flows over time. And so a number of schools have changed their sequence so that chamber is now the lower choir, where years and years ago it used to be the upper choir. I don't know why these things change within that area, but it has changed. But so the concert chorale now would be the higher level, so that a student who was in for 4 years, the last 2 years of, if you were a female singer, you'd be at the higher level doing the more difficult, more challenging literature. Chamber choir this year has 50 to 60 students, because some students get, kind of stay in there for 3 years, and yet the literature hasn't advanced, and so it's trying to make it a little bit more challenging for those students. The other challenge that we've seen, or the other good thing we've seen, is more males interested in choir here. But not quite enough that when we put them into this chamber choir that currently exists with 50 or 60 kids, they're so outnumbered that it's like having a band where you have too many woodwinds or too many brass and they're overwhelming the woodwinds. You have to have a mix for the voices to have a quality sound, and also for students to not feel perhaps overwhelmed or outnumbered. So what had happened is, as these boys were allowed an opportunity to move to that choir, there were so few of them, because the highest skilled boys that were really into vocal performance were making madrigals. So you took your small number of boys that came in as freshmen or sophomore, and you siphoned them off and put a small number with 40, 45, 50 girls, and then a few of them went on to the top. So it became a very out of balance choir, and then also
Not enough baritone females.
yeah. So, but basically, in our fine arts, our students are mixed at all levels anyway. I mean, marching band has all grades mixed together. Most of the art classes do as well. So this isn't really, going to be a problem to have freshman boys, in with, slightly older kids or whatever. I don't see that to be an issue. But in any event, that's why we structured this. She came to me last year and said, Mrs. Morelli, and said, I've really got a problem in that my numbers of choirs are really getting out of whack as I've got more and more kids wanting to stay in year after year, and I need to reconstruct this. And so they spent some time looking at what was done at other schools, and this was the plan they came up with. So does that answer most people's questions?
Except for one.
Yes.
Can we change a class that was co-ed and say it's only girls? What if a boy wants to take the class?
Again, it's about mix of voices and balance.
Is there any other class in the school that's only for girls or boys?
Well, we have girls PE and boys PE for freshmen.
Okay.
I don't think this hasn't been a problem at other schools. There's an appropriate slot for boys, but
Okay.
I'm not concerned with it. Actually, if we had enough boys, they would have their own choir. She would start with just an all-male choir to get them, confident, but she doesn't have quite enough to do that. So. Okay.
Any other questions for Pam?
Is that the end of your presentation?
Nope, I have one more. You wanted me to talk about the C team?
No, before.
What's that?
Oh, yeah, go on, I'm
Oh.
sorry. I'll ask my other question.
Was that,
at the
okay.
end.
The C team, we are going to offer that class again, but we took some time to try and analyze what might be blocking the, healthy enrollment in the course. In the past, we've had maybe not as many students as we wanted during registration. We spent some time re-explaining what the program was over the summer and in the beginning in the fall, and a number of students would switch over into it. We didn't have that luxury this year. We had to make a decision for financial reasons earlier, so we couldn't do some more recruiting in the fall once so the class didn't have enough enrollment to run as the block it is, because you have these teachers connected, so you have to have higher numbers to run it. So we figure there is one part of it. You've got your science, you've got math, you have English, and you have wellness, but they also had an environmental enrichment, which was a full period where students got a quarter credit a semester, and they did extension activities from the work that they had done in the classes. But that blocked a number of students from their electives. So if they wanted to take, they only had 2 extra slots to take other classes in. So if they were going to be a 4-year language student, if they also were interested in the marching band or some other course that they really wanted to take, they were having a lack of options. And so we noticed that a number of students weren't taking it who were highly interested in it because they wanted an extra elective slot. So we've removed the environmental enrichment piece from the package. And the 4 classes now that are going to be a part of the C team are all requirements anyway for freshmen. So we're hoping that that is going to be the inducement that will get more, the numbers to enroll that we've seen in the past, enough that we can run the class. So we're just going to have to find other ways to extend, but that block of that extra enrichment course will not be in there anymore. So that is the way we are proposing to run it in this year's curriculum guide.
Any other questions for Pam on?
On the C team, are you able to figure out, the other reason you couldn't get students into it is because if they, in the highest level of math as a freshman, it's unavailable if you're in the C team.
Yeah.
There's no workaround for that.
There isn't a workaround for that because you have to have a whole other group that would be a 4th option, another construction, and you'd have to have so many kids that have to do that.
Okay.
And I don't think that there would be enough, but.
And I also recall in your note that you talked to the zoo and they're going to waive some kind
They
of
are
fee
going to
we paid.
waive their, we have been, we've had a collaborative relationship. They've helped us build curriculum, and so we have paid them a stipend to do that. They're, Agnes Kovacs at the zoo, an educator there, has worked with our staff here to build the curriculum. They're willing to work with us and not charge us to do that anymore. They want to continue the collaboration. So they're going to come and do a presentation in November, and they'll talk a little bit about that. There's also an opportunity, if this runs, that we could collaborate with a state program run out of that in collaboration with DVR and Triton. They have a program that in agriculture education where we would be, if we get the class to run, we need 2 classes in a sequence. The C team is one, AP Environmental Science is the other, and then automatically the first year we get a $5,000 grant, and it makes it, us available to get a per seat allotment of about $25 to $26 per student taking the course, and then it opens us up to online curriculum at the state level and a number of other grant possibilities and working with some corporate partners. So it's very exciting. Triton has received a national science grant, and they're one of the, I think they're the first community college in the nation to have a 2-year environmental sustainability program. And what they're looking for is they're encouraging schools, high schools, to develop programs where students can then feed into their program at the college level and get a degree in that area. So there's a great push, as you know, in the science and math areas, and this is one way that they're trying to, urban sustainability and agriculture are big areas right now. So we're excited to offer this again to our students and community.
Any other questions for Pam?
I have one other question,
Yeah.
and belabor a point I made earlier.
Yes.
And maybe the finance report will shed some light on this, but are we giving people some false hopes? We're going through a lot of effort to changing curriculum, art, music, that may not even be available next year.
I'm not sure, I know what you mean when you say it would not be available.
Well, if we don't have enough money to pay for classes, we're going to have to cut out electives, aren't we?
I've not had that discussion.
That decision hasn't been made yet. I don't know why, you know.
I understand the
It's a
decision
board
hasn't been
decision to
made.
have that made, and
I
I
would
think if
hope
you're gonna
not.
place doom and gloom on everything, let them come back and see what's happening with it first. It's, no, I know that the scenario 2 from the prior board was that we're gonna cut everything. This board itself has already said we are going to develop our own budget. This is gonna be our budget we're gonna develop. So, it does, I don't think we should inhibit or stop progressing what Pam's doing with changing courses or altering courses to make sure that they're more reflective of what's happening, so, you know.
Well, that's nice. He's one of 7 votes, but maybe you can opine on it.
I think we could probably touch on that in finance,
Okay.
if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, next,
Are we going to, Pam, are you going to have a presentation of the C-team for the public, or with?
Next
Yes.
month.
We're going to do
November?
a number of things. We're going to bring the C-team, some students, and the zoo to present at the board, and so that will be on, RBTV for everyone to see. We will have a small presentation and a team available for answering questions at the 8th grade curriculum night that families come to. We are sending C-team representatives to what we call all-around RB when, at the first few weeks in November, when the staff go into the feeder schools, the middle schools, and do presentations so that students understand some of the unique programming that's available to them. So they will be going as well, along with the electives, which I certainly hope we offer next year, because they're very important. So, but in any event, we did put 3 or 4 things in place in order to communicate that.
To be respectful of time, can I just summarize the rest of the notes and see if that answers the board's questions, or do you want me to go into, in regards to the curriculum council?
is there any more questions on the curriculum? Is there anything else that we missed?
Well, we had a couple email questions in regards to master schedule and electives. So I
But you
just
said
want-
finance would talk about it, right?
Well, this, the master schedule development, just so the board is clear how the master schedule gets developed, students will start selecting courses in November. We finish in January is when the incoming freshmen and current freshmen finish selecting their courses. From there, we look at the courses that were selected. I set staffing parameters for Pam and her leadership council to then go back and identify based on the kids' course selections, how many courses we will run in each department and what type of FTEs each department will be aligned. And then from there, usually that takes place in February, and we start looking at drafts of the master schedule. The issue that all schools run into is a lot of people do not develop their master schedule till after March, or at least start doing that in March. But with the 60-day and 45-day notices you have to provide teachers in regards to reduction in force, it somewhat happens after the fact. So why I've tried to move staffing up this year is to give us a chance to run at least some drafts of the master schedule to make sure our staffing aligns with the courses we're offering. And where that could become a problem is, we could have the kids sign up for several courses and we could be staffed according to how those kids are signing up for courses. But once they're actually moved into the computer and student schedules are printed out for 1,500 kids, there's going to be some conflicts. And when some of these conflicts occur, it stops students from getting certain classes. Those are mostly called your singletons and doubletons, where there's only maybe one section of that class offered. And so the master schedule development is really a time-intensive process that needs a lot of input from department chairs and teachers and administration. And I think we kind of ran up against the clock last year in my analysis, even though I wasn't here, and looking at it this year, because I recognize, hey, we're running some classes at significantly smaller sizes than what we should be. But when you went back and pulled the files on what kids were signing up for, there was a huge conflict rate. In some classes, 50 and 60%. But you're already staffed for those classes. So it doesn't, it might be looked at two different ways. So why we're trying to move up staffing earlier, so that the month of February, we could run some skeleton master schedules to make sure we get an idea of courses being offered and courses requested, and our FTEs align a little better with that. So I hope that answers the one question. The second question is elective selections. The courses that are in a curriculum guide are looked at and they're offered for students to sign up for. When students sign up for that, based on the number of students that sign up for the class and in alignment with the staffing parameters, it's then determined if that course is going to run or not. So what I've encouraged the department chairs this year to do, knowing that we're in a financial, the financial status of the district, is to look at some of these electives that they've offered in past years, and if they've run at significantly low numbers or numbers that are not going to meet our current staffing standards, which we've already been talking about for the last few months, to maybe pull those off the books or consider maybe not running them next year, so that kids can know up front different electives they may want to choose. Normally, I mean, we can go ahead and list all the electives that are in the curriculum guide. Kids can sign up for them. But if they don't meet, in a lab class at least 26-1, or in a non-lab class 30-1, we probably wouldn't run that class. And then those handful of students would have to go back to their counselor and pick another class. Moving up the staffing time frame gives us a couple weeks of February to do that before the reductions in force have to be brought to the board. So it's giving us a little more time to problem solve, to help recruit. If the C team's a big goal of the science department and the board, they'll have time to see where students' conflicts are occurring, and if there's a way that can be something rescheduled in the master schedule, things like that. So that's how our electives are somewhat selected. It's based on teacher ratio and then student interest requests. Any other questions in regards to curriculum?
Yeah, I'd like to bring up a couple things we talked about in the curriculum meeting. And I also I'll send to Matt, I have the Illinois requirements, the high school, the Illinois State Board of Education state requirements, and I'll send it out to everyone. A couple things that came up. We talked about not making an open campus, for senior, and we may decide senior, junior, allowing the students to not have to be here for the full 7 hours. If they've made all their credits, they can elect to leave an hour early or come in an hour late. That's always been something we've done. This is the first year where we're not allowing students to do that, and then students have to take another course whether they want to or not. And so some are in just a study hall, and that's money that the district has to spend. When you look at it, the appendix, the state requirements are for 16.75 hours for graduation requirements. That's not even 5 credits a year, and we're forcing, the kids to take 7 a year. So our students have more than enough credits, most of them, to graduate. So that might be something I think we, as a board, should consider, is opening that opportunity up again for students to go to work or whatever. And then the second thing we wanted to bring up, it was discussed. There is that requirement for the fine arts, or for the art survey, or I might have the class wrong. It's not a state requirement. We passed it as a board requirement about 6 years ago to encourage students to at least take an art class. I'm not opposed to the arts. I think the arts are fine. And we said we'd look at the state requirements. Well, when you look at the state requirements, there's 1 year required, but that includes music, foreign language, vocational education. So that might be another thing that this board wants to look at. Maybe not make that a requirement, but make it a guideline, a strong suggestion. But you have some students who have difficulty getting that 1 hour in. They're forced to take a class when it's not a state requirement. Some would prefer not to. They would prefer maybe to take a vocational class. So I think those are a couple of things that we would want to consider as a board and vote on.
Can I go back to your point you made before on the goals? Isn't it really our kind of request and our duty to ask the administration to recommend what they suggest and then bring it to us, and decide whether we agree or not. So in other words, if Kevin and Pam don't think we should have fine arts or want to change it, like the way Pam did with those other classes, shouldn't they come and suggest it instead of us kind of deciding what the curriculum should be?
Well, I think we can bring it up and ask the question. I mean,
Okay.
as a board member, it's not a state requirement. Do we want to revisit that? And they can come back to us and say, no, we feel strongly. We say, okay, but as a board member, I think we can ask it. It's not a state requirement. We're forcing kids to take this class. Do we want to still continue in their practice? The same thing with the open campus. Kevin did suggest that at the meeting, but he didn't bring it up here. Not sure why not.
We're gonna cover that under personnel.
That's under personnel, okay, but it was kind of a curricular matter, again, so
Sure.
the committees are kind of overlapping. But again, as board members, we're looking at efficiencies. We bring it up to administration. If administration brings us back more data and says it's our recommendation, you don't go that way, then we could accept it or not. But board members have the purview to at least ask or
No, I
suggest
agree.
something.
But you're on the committee, so
I think where we're getting, I think where some of these questions are being generated from though is gonna lead us back to personnel and finance. So before we maybe engage in some discussions on it, I think what Laura's bringing up are good
good
points.
point.
And yeah, they could be aligned to the curriculum committee, but you wouldn't currently look at your graduation requirements unless we, in that financial plan that we're putting together, said, hey, we can't, if we don't pass a referendum or if we don't have these monies, we can't continue to force kids to take these I mean,
Right.
that's what would generate that discussion. That's why I'm tying that more to finance and some of that. I don't think there's any issue with our current graduation requirements or what we're doing. Matter of fact, I think you have a strong
No.
curriculum here.
I would just like to clarify that by not allowing the late arrival and the early release, we did not spend more on study hall supervisors. We actually spent less this year. We reduced the amount, we just put them in a larger space. And instead of being in a classroom and running 2 for 3 periods a day, there's one study hall supervisor all day, and he's in the cafeteria with larger numbers of students. And then the students, if they chose, so the study hall, if they wanted a study hall, they could get it, or if they wanted a class, we didn't increase our FTE. Remember, our FTE went down this year. Our class sizes just went up, so we allowed those students to take classes. So it really was not, did not cost the district extra to change the release or the late start. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay,
But on the early release, and we're going to talk about that in finance, we have students who are requesting to have that. So I think we ought to consider that.
It's definitely something
It's
the
on the
board
table.
should, I'm not sure how it got approved or when it was approved or when the change occurred. I think this is the first year that that's in place. But that's something that can be considered to help possibly, it could possibly reduce costs because maybe it's a student.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, and I think we touched briefly on this in the personnel side, and
Right.
is that if the master's, at the time you are having students sign up for classes and looking at the schedule, would that, by offering an open campus, would they potentially sign up for one less class, whether it be a study hall or be an elective?
Yeah.
And if there's an impact of 20, 25 seniors or what have you, it potentially can cut a class or a study hall off, as opposed to offering, I don't know how many study halls are being offered now, but is there a study hall offered at 7th period or?
There's a study hall 7 periods a day.
So would that potentially have gone away if, I don't know, I mean,
Well,
you don't know,
the
where the,
One way that it could be looked at that way is that students under the current board policy are required to take 5 courses. 5 courses and a lunch because you have to be in school for 300 minutes in order for average daily attendance rate. And so if you have an open campus, that student may choose to, the thing I think what we want to be careful is you don't want to encourage one way or the other.
Right,
You want to leave
right.
the option to the students and their interest level and academic interest. But when you have a closed campus, it could be considered where a student then has to select either do I want to sit in a study hall or take another course. If you have an open campus, it could attract for what Laura mentioned. If students have working arrangements or maybe are providing for their family or have other obligations outside of school, they come here, they get their graduation requirements, and then they leave to attend to those matters. You know, could it be a financial savings? It could be for the district. I mean, only the student's interest during the registration process could determine that.
Well, there was an academic philosophy behind doing it, and that is if a student needed a study hall, from the research we've done with our students, they tend to do their studying when they're in a study hall. When they sleep in late and come late or leave early, they've told us they're really not using their time as productively. So it was to try and assist them if they needed the study hall, to keep them using, you know, here doing the study hall, or to encourage them to explore an area of interest. If they wanted to take a vocational course and they hadn't, it might explore, you know, might pique interest that could turn into a career choice, or they could take another course for rigor, because we keep hearing that the more students are prepared, the better off they'll do when they get to the next level. So it was, you know, a response to what our students were telling us and what the research was telling us. So we had an academic reasoning behind it. It was not intended to be punitive. It was trying to assist the students so that they could reach their potential. But, you know, and clearly the board has the prerogative of changing that. It's the fact that they're only required to take 4 or 5 classes. If you up that, which a number of schools have done, that's going to increase, be a cost increase to the school. But
Okay, anything else on curriculum? I'd like to move on to facilities.